And over the next couple of weeks, we'll be hosting a good number of these matchups between players. At least in this phase, it'll be between head-to-head players in round robin, and winners of specific matches in the bracket will later move on to a phase 2. And it looks like we just began. So good luck to the runners.
Is this a curse?
Because of the differences between PC, at least on Nier Automata, and PS4, is mostly because of performance. And obviously, because a PC player has access to much better hardware than a PS4 player does, one thing with the timing is that we're actually having to level the playing field. Instead of where in a PC player versus a PC player, because PC players are able to use a loadless timer, we're able to evenly compare between players. But in matchups like these, where we're having to match up a PC player and a PS4 player, we're actually comparing against real time. Mostly because PS4 can't actually have a loadless timer with it. Although, with the help of our moderators, we managed to time out those loads, at least in recordings. So, on the leaderboards, sorry.
I was just going to say, the difference in load time shouldn't be too huge. I know certainly between me and a few runners, we're looking at only maybe a minute or so. So, as long as they don't finish within a minute of each other, we should be, okay in terms of loadless time.
And that also depends on the PS4's hardware as well. So sometimes between even just a hard disk PS4 versus a SSD PS4, there is still a huge amount of variance between load times. But in order to create a fair match, we've put together strictly, or we're comparing both runners in strictly just real time.
I mean, and obviously that levels the playing field across the people who use computers as well, because not every computer is going to have the same load times. So it's just kind of there to give everyone a level playing field, so to speak.
Yeah, and unfortunately, live during the race, it's not going to be entirely apparent in terms of a PS4 player's load time. Most of that timing will be taken out in an actual submission when put to the leaderboard. But at least for the moment, just comparing against RTA time is the most even of a playing field that we can make. And for anybody who has seen speedruns of Nier Automata, you'll know that most of the gameplay is very sort of drastic between certain sections of the game. What we've been watching for the past 3 minutes, almost 4 minutes now, is a bit of a unique section. It's in this flight unit that we're flying into our mission, and the gameplay is definitely really interesting. You can see from these different camera angles and how the game really sort of bends the player's perspective to really sort of jar up the player's experience. And for me, I found that really enjoyable.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The constant shifting of styles that the game wants to go for, definitely, especially with the speedrun, because you're going through the game so rapidly, you get to experience it all back to back to back. So
definitely, yeah.
Right now we're seeing them in this almost twin-stick shooter-esque side scroller, maybe even vertical shoot 'em up at some points. But both runners are pretty much about to go into the main bulk of the gameplay in a second or two.
So this section of the game really sort of shows the 3D aspect of the prologue and the rest of the game as well, where you're in control of this character. It's more than just a flight unit. It's your character is actually piloting the flight unit, and the game really transitions well between these moments. And like Tech said, especially in the speedrun, you do get to notice these changes in perspective and settings really quickly.
Yeah, it definitely helps to keep it very fresh, and it's very good, I think, in terms of watching as well. But obviously, I'm a bit biased in that opinion.
Is that our target?
Negative. This enemy is unrelated. Proposal. Dispatch it as
So MT had opted for a little bit of a faster strat there, where sometimes, at least when facing off against that medium biped, normally it takes a little bit longer for the cutscene to trigger, because 2B has to jump up into the air and trigger the cutscene. But for whatever reason, when you spin around in a sort of circular motion, the cutscene just automatically plays. And it's a little bit of a faster strat that runners have incorporated. But still relatively close between runners here.
Yeah, we're actually coming out of this boss at a very similar time, and we're going to see the first slight sequence break of the game coming up here. So what MT is doing is he uses the crate to climb up to the bridge and then gain access to this crane, which allows us to skip quite a large section of essentially just running. Just running past enemies.
exit.
Making our way into Silo 2.
Negative. Nearby enemies are jamming our signal.
Nothing's ever easy.
You'll quickly notice here for MT's strategy of taking out some of these small little enemies is to do a technique known as pod slow-mo, where your pod, the little robot that's on your shoulder constantly firing, has a cooldown ability that when you first hold it to charge up the program, it slows time, and you can actually exploit that by charging up the pod program and canceling it with a fire. And we use that very often in most sections.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I'd say for a lot of the combat, especially, it can help out a lot. There are some fights where you will see that people don't want to use that because it can actually slow down the combat, but overall as a whole, I would say it does help out because you can just kind of stick an enemy in place and just basically wail away on them.
Oh geez, both runners here just being able to get across the bridge at basically the same time. MT got there a little bit earlier than Reliictz, but both of them took a little bit longer on that skip. That is a very precise high jump in trying to time their attacks so that way they can maximize the amount of height that they get to cross that bridge. It's a very frame dependent and frame rate dependent trick.
Yeah, it's most certainly one that seems to give, well, even experienced runners quite a lot of trouble.
Oh yeah. I know from experience I have a good number of failed attempts on that.
So now what we're seeing here is just a little bit more combat. You might have seen MT actually, as he entered this silo, lined up all the enemies and shot a laser. We're going to see him try one here. And that was very nice. Yeah, very nice. If you stand in the correct spot, you can actually take out 4 of those stubbies without having to go through a melee attack them all. And Reliictz has opted to go for 3 of them, which is still very nice.
I surveyed the entire factory, but couldn't find anything resembling our target.
Maybe they
MT deciding to skip the Engels swag.
So coming up outside here, there's going to be another boss fight along this bridge type section. Oh, Reliictz is going for it!
Oh, he's going.
get a location wrong. I guess
Let's see how it plays out.
from time to time.
It looks like he's... Oh, that was so close.
I wouldn't bet on that.
That's gotta be it, right? Yes!
Dude! Yes!
That's fantastic.
So the trick that Reliictz just did there was an interesting high jump using some of the catwalks along the side of this sort of oil rig machine that we'll see in a little bit. But you can actually climb some of those catwalks and make it across to the other side. It's just swag.
Very swag. That's only recently been discovered, right? That was maybe in the last week, I want
recently.
to say, something like that.
Within the past couple of weeks, it was brought to our attention, yeah. Still pretty swag.
It's very cool. And we see MT getting to the end of Mark's 1 there. Or Mark's 2, I should say. And he's
Big
just going
angles,
into...
boy.
Yeah, big angles now, and this is going to be the first real point of RNG of the run, coming up shortly after this first phase with him. Basically, Engels has a very small pool of attacks he can choose from, most of which are fast. However, there's one that is extremely slow, and it's the attack we're currently seeing on MT's screen at the moment. So, during this first phase, it's not really a problem at all. In fact, we kind of want to see this attack so we can rack up some damage on him. But shortly after this, we're going to see 9S pop out in a flight suit, and from then the fight is timed. Well, he basically does one attack. So if we see anything other than punches, then that's very good. But if we see punches, that loses quite a large amount of time.
Plus RNG. Oh no! So MT taking the punches here, that's about a 20-second time loss or so. Might be a little bit more, but around 20 seconds.
I mean, this attack animation's so long that it even finishes with one of the attacks he can just choose to throw out, which is, I think, the second slowest. The clap that he does there at the end.
Oh, both get punches. So punches is basically the deciding factor of the prologue. This RNG is a huge time loss, and especially for much later in the run, there isn't too much RNG like this that really defines how much time gain one player can get over another.
Yeah, I think it's actually something very nice about this game. If you are resetting for punches, at least it's only, what, 12 minutes in, 11 minutes into a run, you know? At least you're not having to get through an hour of the run to find out you have to reset to some RNG that you can't help control.
MT is trying to find the pot of gold at the other side of the rainbow, on the other side of this bridge.
I love how they just expected you to never get that far along the bridge and are like, we'll just stop making it.
Hacking in.
It's funny because you can actually get to basically that same point later on in B ending prologue, but unfortunately we'll never be able to see that in this tournament.
Nice, MT using some very nice vertical movement there to actually skip a small section of Engels there. Just saves you having to kind of loop around him. And he's going into a notorious fight, which we have dubbed ninjas, because these guys will dodge everything just like that stubby did there. I'm sure
Ninja
you...
stubbies.
Yeah, I'm sure you probably have a lot to say about these stubbies. I mean, the amount of times I've fired a laser into them and just had 3 of them just hop back and just completely evade it. So we'll see how Reliictz' ninja fight is here.
Clearing out pretty quickly on both runners. Obviously, the better the laser and the less stubbies that can backdash, the better, because mostly when mobbing those enemies. It's all about how fast you can kill those. So having a well-placed damage glitch to break some of the shields or laser the stubbies mid-animation, anything you can do to kill them quickly is the best. So now both Reliictz and MT are facing angles again, and because this section is purely dialogue-based, we're actually waiting for the dialogue to coincide with one of Angle's attacks, so that way the time between the dialogue finishing and Angle starting this quote-unquote story punch, as MT just got punched back right there, to basically trigger the end sequence of the prologue. Sometimes Angles can be really mean and just give you a really long attack and just waste time.
So yeah, I actually, I really like how it looks when he punches you away and you fly towards him, which we should be able, well, yeah, we're seeing it on Reliic's screen now. I think it looks really cool with the laser kind of shooting up and down the middle.
Ooh, Reliic's going for some swag there, firing off some missiles when the game doesn't even tell you that you have a missile pod.
Very cool. And now MT has arrived in Bunker. So I don't think there's really much to say about this next section. There's a lot of menuing and cutscene skipping, and I think that's really about it. Unless you have anything interesting to say about this here dialogue?
No, not really. A lot of this is just menuing, and it's very sort of optimized in some respects. Knowing how to navigate the menus properly when setting up your settings, yes, that's actually a thing, is kind of important, because occupying the least amount of time in this section is generally better.
There's a lot of very cool Easter eggs as well in this menu. Like, I know, certainly for one, if you keep saying no to turning the self-destruct on, 9S gets a little bit upset with you. So it's very interesting how there are all of these these small things just hidden in this one little dialogue bit.
9S just wants the booty.
I mean, who can blame him?
Nice.
Huh?
True, true.
There's...
Okay, so MT is backdashing into 9S there just to upset his positioning, and he's actually standing in front of a dialogue a dialogue block right in front of those transporters, and when you walk into it, it triggers you into a very slow walk, and what he did just then was basically he stopped moving, talked to 9S, and walked into the dialogue trigger. That causes what we call a partner dialogue skip, where when you have a text box active at the bottom of your screen and you walk into dialogue, you're generally able to skip that dialogue. There are a couple places in the game, and you can see Reliictz doing that right now, there are a couple places in the game that this is not possible. But 9 times out of 10, on most dialogues, you can actually skip that dialogue.
Yeah, so that's only a very small time save. What would you reckon? About maybe a second and a half at most?
I think so. I don't believe I've seen the actual timing on it, but runners do claim that it saves like 2 or 3 seconds.
Yeah,
in
so it's
comparison
just
to
a very minor optimization.
Sorry.
Sorry, man. Just a very minor optimization that we can do, when I think we're going to see quite a few of those throughout this run, just kind of saving very small amounts of time here and there.
Yeah. It's more notable in some of the longer categories.
Oh,
but
yeah.
there are some instances in A ending that we'll be able to witness here.
Bunker to 2B, come in. I've set a landing point for your flight.
So again, we're back in the flight units, dealing with more enemies. A lot of these sections are just killing enemies as quickly as possible, just to move to the next dialogue phase and go into the next section.
And now we're seeing MT just arriving into the world that we'll basically be spending pretty much the rest of this run in. We're going to see it change in various ways throughout the run, which should be very interesting if you haven't seen that before. There are big story reasons why the world does change, but MT's doing a huge plunge there off that roof.
Long plunges, Craigasm.
Feels so good. Plunges are fantastic. They're basically the fastest movement that you can do if you're in the air essentially and need to travel horizontally.
And the key important thing in that is mostly because of having a short sword on the heavy slot. You'll notice that basically all of the combat that we do in this run is with the short sword on a heavy slot, because it's just really broken in combat, in movement. It's pretty silly.
Yeah, it essentially unlocks all the broken things that we're able to do during this run. I think it would be very interesting if that wasn't in the run and we had to rely on some other things. But yeah, I'm very thankful that it is, because the small swords in this game are just insanely broken. So we haven't actually spoken about the damage glitch, which is how you will see essentially all of the combat done, which is using the small sword, as we've said. Basically, you use the small sword in the heavy slot, and it's a very simple input, actually. You just heavy while dashing. And 2B will throw her sword out in a very nice spinning motion. And essentially what happens is that deals, if I'm correct, around 5 times more damage than usual?
Yeah, 4.5 to 5 times damage, generally.
So that's essentially what the majority of the combat is, which is why it's very important for us to have that small sword in the heavy slot. It's just very nice, but it also allows a lot of very cool movement as well.
It's a little humorous because, at least in the demo of this game back, I forget when exactly it was released, but it was like early 2017 when the demo of Nier Automata was released, and there was in fact a damage glitch that was possible in that iteration of the game. Platinum eventually patched that out in the full version of the game, but what's funny is that this short sword damage exploit has fallen through the cracks. Through one way or another, it is still in the game. It is still possible to just steamroll every encounter that you come across, even at very low levels.
It's interesting. I wonder how much of it is intentional from the developers, because there are some things where you think, well, obviously that's not intended, when we're jumping through the walls. But yeah, there are some things that I find it very strange that it managed to slip through.
It is very strange, but for us as players and as runners, trying to determine developer intent is just the wrong question to be asking. It's more like...
Yeah.
Anyway. Hashtag cats and ruling. Anyway, so what MT just finished there and Reliictz is almost about to finish here are some fetch quests that we were just doing. Trying to unlock some of the vendors and upgrade our sword at the same time. You'll notice MT is doing a different move that he was before. He's now doing a dash plus a delayed heavy. This movement that he's doing right now is a pretty fast source of movement. It's not as fast as some others in the game, but it's still faster than most. Making our way to the desert here.
There's a very cool series of skips about to come up in a very short amount of time, but before that we're actually going to see MT just do a quick set of buys before we take on the next portion of the game.
We've got what can I help?
So essentially, MT here is buying a few buff ups, so some melee attack and ranged attack ups. He's buying some items that allow us to ride an animal, which will come into play a bit later on. and also a chip called Resilience. This game, being an action RPG, has quite a large chip system, which is how you kind of customize how the characters feel in combat and in various other things. In this category, we're really only looking for the Resilience chip and a few critical hits up, because critical hits in this game are insanely broken. But yeah, I know certainly casually there's a lot of very interesting chips that can be used. And yeah, on MT's screen there, we saw him actually skip the barricade there to get to the desert. Normally in intended play, we'd have to speak to an NPC called Jackass, and she blows it up. She blows up this barricade, but there's actually a clip out we can do. MT actually clipped back in before, but there's a way that you can skirt all the way around the edges of that cavern area, and you can skip the very short cutscene that just shows that you've discovered the desert.
You'll see on Reliict's screen that same out of bounds from the desert transporter to the entrance of the desert area. And surprisingly enough, that pod launch into the transporter, I actually found that by accident entirely. There was another clip out to that same out of bounds area that a gentleman named Marky found. Bless Marky, the god. But with that pod launch, it makes it significantly easier. And that same out of bounds that Tech was just talking about, Reliictz is attempting here. So there's a small little lip that enables you to just stay out of bounds and skip that cutscene entirely. Oh, Don Burrow's trolling MT. Oh no. So a technique that MT was trying just then is what we call stupid rock TM, in that the rock face on the right-hand side of that little alcove area is rather slippy when plunging, and at the precise moment of when that machine burrows underground, you can plunge into that rock, and the rock will basically carry you all the way to the other side, right next to the cutscene that you need to hit. It's a little faster, but mostly it's just swag.
Yeah, it's very cool. Anywhere that you can do one of those crazy plunge slides is very cool. And MT here is doing a very complex skip, actually. So this is all out of bounds, the section that MT is in at the moment. And he's going to use this to essentially skip a very large portion of the desert, just going all the way around some cutscenes we'd have to sit through otherwise.
Yeah, this one in particular saves about like 35 seconds or something, because you would otherwise have to sit through those cutscenes. So things are moving really fast here. Now that MT's in an area known as Atom Pit, he's going to buff up here, and one thing you'll notice is that he's also going to change his other weapon set to also have the short sword on his heavy slot. That'll enable him to use a technique known as double damage exploit, where you're able to throw one damage glitch out on one weapon set, switch weapon sets, and perform the same inputs to have another spinning sword active at the same time, both having the damage exploit active, which significantly increases our damage output on bosses, on large enemy mobbing sections like these.
Yeah, so Atom Pit's a really fun area in my opinion. It's kind of just pure combat. You just essentially have to wait a timer out, and the more you kill, the better chances you have of getting a crit chip, which are very, very broken.
And generally, more kills, more XP, higher level for the end of the run, higher level, more damage. You get the idea. It's an RPG. So after all that mobbing, MT is facing Adam right now. Just forget about Adam's crotch. So MT is trying to basically get enough damage on Adam to skip a little cutscene in there that looks like he got it. He dealt enough damage to the boss that he actually skips a little phase. So now that Adam goes up onto this girder, skipping that cutscene saves, I don't know, within the region of like 10 seconds or something.
Yeah, and ideally, if you're fast enough, it allows you to actually get a really quick cycle once he goes up there, using a double pod laser, which we saw MT do. If you were looking closely, you will have seen that after he double fired a pod laser, which can happen when you charge it up, he shot his second one. If Adam is actually still taunted, which is a mechanic in the game that basically buffs enemies, it means they deal more damage and take more damage, but you can just get him down there very quickly.
Yeah, one thing that most casual players actually don't know in this game is that you can actually taunt as 2B, 9S, and A2.
It stopped. Looks like
It's not an ability that's exclusive to A2. The only difference is that you just have to spam your flashlight button on an enemy. You'll see that when an enemy is taunted, you'll see that their head or there will be an outline around their body, which is red, and it'll make a little steam noise. That is when the player knows that the enemy that they're facing is taunted. So if you look at MT's screen here, he's doing something called swag box skip. This basically is a very precise pod launch that he's pushing the box a certain distance and then pod launching into the corner and quickly dashing to the left to clip out of the map through one of the rocks and basically navigate the tunnel out of bounds. You'll also notice that he saved there and loaded the same save. That is possible because of picking up the desert entrance transporter. So, because he's within the save circle of that desert transporter, he can just save, load the save, and he's back at the transporter and closer to the amusement park.
Operator to 9S. Data upload.
So Reliictz is just finished up on Adam here.
Incoming message from the commander. Initiating
Fairly nice combat at the end there.
2B, 9S.
And we see MT heading down to the, well, making his way to the amusement park, which is one of my favourite areas in the entire game. I'm not sure about you, Myth, but...
Oh yeah, I really enjoyed the amusement park.
There's some fantastic side quests as well there, but we won't have a chance to see, unfortunately. I mean, there is actually one category where we would see them, but it's a very long run, and I don't think there's many runners for that category at the moment.
There can be. Hey Tech, when do you want to do 98% quests?
Well, I don't know if Marbles would appreciate those load times.
I suppose.
So yeah, if anyone wasn't aware, I'm a PS4 player, so essentially every time I upload a score to the leaderboards, one of the very nice and helpful mods has to manually watch all my run and time the loads themselves, which is you know, very nice that they do that.
What are those?
Reliictz opting not to go for the swag box.
What the?
Wow, this is weird.
Glad the amusement park skipped. The amusement park is not skipped. Well, my good sir, unfortunately we did find a way. There's a clip that MT just did there where in one of the corners of the buildings you're able to plunge down into it and go out of bounds. So through all the trees and all the non-solid buildings here, MT is going to navigate to hit some of the triggers and activate the roller coaster.
Do you really think it's a good idea to leave that tank behind?
If they aren't hostile, fighting them is a waste of time.
Very cool. MT opting not to go for a very, very difficult trick called the auto-scroller coaster skip. I think that's what it's called, right?
That's the working title we're working with.
But that skip's extremely new in the community. If you were very lucky earlier and managed to catch the run between Questecker and Ceci, Questecker actually managed to pull that off and get a spear, which basically gives us slightly faster movement, but it was very, very hyped to see.
So what do you think? I mean, if you want to call me nice.
And now MT is just on essentially an auto-scroller. A few enemies drop down, he's going to kill them.
Alright.
And that's going to lead us into the next boss fight. Oh, nice. Reliictz nailed the plunge into the sewers.
I always love it when that happens. It's the greatest feeling of jumping and plunging into that ladder and just plunging all the way down to the bottom. So MT is just entering the most interesting boss of this game, I'd say. Otherwise known as Beauvoir.
What the hell?
Our records don't say anything about a machine.
Yeah, I'll let you handle this, Smith. You probably know a lot more about Beauvoir than me.
Sure. The fight is basically broken up into a couple different sections. This first section that MT is facing right now, when Beauvoir dismounts the stage, she's able to be damaged, and if you damage her fast enough, you're able to cause her to do a single attack, and when you reach her threshold, she stops that attack and returns back up to the stage. Unfortunately, MT was a little slow to damage her there, so she got away from him just a little bit, but not too much.
It's trying to hack us.
Right there on MT's screen, we got to see a little bit of the hacking minigame, which is more prominent in the next playthrough, but unfortunately we won't be seeing more of that.
Or at least hopefully we won't be seeing any more of it.
Hopefully. In this next section, you'll see MT trying to take care of all these crucifixes with android bodies on them as fast as possible, because getting hit by any of these hacking waves and hacking sort of rings that they have around them loses him about 8 seconds. Fortunately, he didn't get hacked there, but for each hack to complete, it's about an 8-second time loss. So now that those bodies are finished, MT returns to damaging the boss, gets her to a threshold, and then gets her to another threshold, and finishes the fight. One thing to actually point out here, as soon as the boss finishes, or rather, as soon as the boss reaches her final threshold, MT holds self-destruct there. That's important for a later technique and strategy that we use for transporting between Pascal's village and the resistance camp very, very quickly.
It's almost like it had actual emotion.
The machines don't have fear.
Yeah, it was some very clean combat from MT there during that. And Reliictz is just entering Beauvoir's room now, so they're both quite close to each other still. Very, very close, to be fair.
Hostiles.
And here is the flag-waving robot, everyone's favourite. He's going to show MT where Pascal's village is.
This way. I love that robot.
He always, to be fair, MT has kept him alive, which is amazing. Because he's directly where you want to go, and usually he dies very fast. So you could make a little game of it yourself, try and keep him alive.
Keep him alive? What? No, we want that money, we want that XP. We want those 3 XP, man.
Man, flag-waving robot didn't deserve this.
Theories about that, but no one knows for sure. Hard to tell what an alien is thinking, you know?
But yeah, MT has now arrived in the peaceful machine village that's run by a machine called Pascal, who's going to become an ally of ours throughout this story. Some fantastic music in this area, I can say that for certain. In fact, throughout the entire game there's some fantastic music, but I think the Pascal's village theme is especially very good.
Every track is so good in this game.
Yeah,
There's not a single one that I feel like there's not my favorite. Every track is my favorite.
So basically all Pascal does is tell you that he has something that he wants you to take back to the resistance camp. So now we are seeing some of those items that MT bought before the desert.
MT's going for a boar. Let's see how this plays out. He gets the boar. Okay. If he does the technique that I'm thinking of, then yeah, there it is. So funny enough, boar hopping like that, rapidly tapping A or jump while riding a boar is slightly faster, but I don't think he's opting to do that right now. Ideally, the strategy, if you were riding a boar, the fastest movement, surprisingly, is spamming jump. For whatever reason, it's faster than actually sprinting with the boar. Don't ask me why it is.
Yeah, I've actually never seen anyone use missiles on the back of a bar as well until MT did it then, and that looks very cool.
It's a little bit of an older strategy, unfortunately, because we are going to be dying immediately after getting to the resistance camp. Some of that XP that we gain while riding the animal is useless. Oh, the boar is giving MT a little bit of an issue there. Trying to wrangle the animal to actually kill you is a bit of an art, to say the least. The AI for the animals are not exactly the greatest, and especially if your partner decides to just take the animal's aggro from you, then you're gonna have a hard time. So, like magic, MT is back in Pascal's village with the quest item that he needed from the resistance camp, saving, I forget how much time it is, but it's like a minute or something to go back and forth between the two locations. It's pretty silly.
Yeah, it's very handy that it's there, because otherwise we'd just probably have to rebait the animal and just run all the way back, and it's not very interesting, to be honest. So.
And that system is mostly thanks to the bodies system in this game. Very similar to Souls games, where you can leave like a bloodstain in the game world for other players to find. In Nier Automata, there's a similar system where if you're connected to the network, you can leave behind your body in a specific location when you die, with a message for other players to select from. And unfortunately, in this speedrun, we don't actually have those network connections, but for casual players, you'll most likely have seen bodies scattered around the world.
There's some very funny things that you can say as well with the bodies.
We're not going anywhere unless we pass through that Goliath's legs.
In those messages.
Ooh, looks like Reliictz is having a... He didn't get that moose, but at least he's gonna get a boar. Let's see if he goes for the boar hopping.
Doesn't...
Yeah,
there we go. Reliictz knows.
So coming up here on MT's screen, he's coming into a first boss fight that, surprisingly, the devs didn't really think out too well, because you could just hop right through a hole and skip the boss fight.
Yeah, and that was a perfect demonstration by MT there of how to do that. So there's essentially a kind of tight hole. It's sometimes tight, sometimes not so much. But yeah, you just basically slip right through there, and you just completely skip that boss. And just to prove that this boss is complete shenanigans, we come up to a second Engels in the city, and this one has a very broken hitbox.
Oh, it doesn't look like he's going to get the hitbox on this. Engels was doing the wrong attack there. Yeah. Ideally, you would want Engels to be firing off a laser from his face in order to get the quick kill, but because Engels was firing off missiles, his hitboxes aren't exactly in line with where you want them to be. But funny enough, only this second Engels in the city is the trigger. The first one is not required. Again, don't ask me why. So one thing to point out here while MT flies back into the city ruins is that the landscape has changed a little bit, in that now there's a giant hole in the middle of the city ruins.
Yeah, so this is really cool, actually. I know Yokotaro's talked about this before and his idea for open world, but his idea was to basically to create a realistic world was to have it constantly changing, so it's kind of subverting your expectations, which is a very interesting way of doing it, as opposed to, you know, just having like a typical massive open space. But yeah, now we can see MT making his way through this hole that's opened up, and he's going to find himself deep, deep under the city, where there is another boss fight.
Lovingly named Alan and Steve.
So yeah, you may notice these two beautiful boys from earlier. We've fought one of them before, and now we're going to fight the other one.
And who knows? We'll wipe out the androids next.
MT going a little ham there. Unfortunately, this whole negotiation section is purely dialogue dependent. But what players often opt to do is to kill Eve in front of you once, so that way you get the XP from defeating the boss, and then doing a specific technique that allows you to escape this 2D sort of side-scroller arena. And hopefully MT is able to escape here. Reliictz trying for the same hole in the wall at City Engels. Unfortunately, he's not going to be able to get it, but he's making a quick recovery. Nice.
Yeah.
Using a technique that is known as a double lift there, he's able to basically, or rather Relic is able to double lift off of the rocks in that arena, and again escape that arena. However, looking at MT, he was actually using an attack from Eve and counter-attacking to get more height, and then starting a high jump sequence to get even more height. That height, you're actually able to escape that 2D section and get over the wall. So the idea here is to basically just kill as many enemies as you can in this section, pick up some of the world drops, some of the items. And now that the fight's over, MT's just teleported right back to where Alan and Steve were.
Back this way again?
And back out of the cave he goes onto the bunker.
Yeah. 2B, this is Operator 60.
Reliictz just landing in the city ruins.
Yeah, Reliictz got the quick kill on City Engels as well with the broken hitbox, so that was nice.
One thing to point out on Reliictz's view, which also occurred on MT's movement through this section, is for whatever reason when Commander is talking to you in this section and you quickly go to your objective here down at the bottom of the pit, Commander's dialogue does something weird with whatever dialogue that 2B and 9S say, and this interaction causes a an interesting interaction where the game thinks you're always in a phone call. So the iconic little ring that you hear every time a phone call happens to the characters will no longer play that ring noise from basically this point on till the end of the game, whenever you actually close out of the game.
Why don't we rest a little bit, 2B?
Each one of those little rings for every dialogue adds up, like, I don't know, a second and a half per dialogue. So over the course of the game, having this quote-unquote Skype glitch active saves a good amount of time throughout the longer categories, and even in A ending as well.
Yeah, certainly a very nice trick. And I mean, it's basically free. It's not as if you have to do anything for it, so
Yeah.
that makes it even nicer.
Even in a casual playthrough, you would experience the same thing, where phone calls just suddenly stop making the ring noise.
Okay, now we're going to see MT do basically the last bit of shopping that we're going to do all run. So these are called the pre-A2 buys, basically because we're about to go to a forest. So, but yeah,
Ooh,
this
an
is
interesting decision for MT not going for defensive buffs there.
yeah. Would you like to talk about what MT's trying here?
Sure. Basically, the gist of the technique that I was alluding to earlier, known as a double lift, requires you to
When do you think you're willing to call me nines?
basically perform a lift while moving up a slope. And there's a good number of slopes in this game, and even just objects in the world that trigger this if the timing is correct. When you perform a lift movement up a slope, it actually still thinks you're on the ground. So with that, you're able to perform a second lift and continue any high jump combo that you would normally. This allows you to gain access to new heights, essentially, and do other things in the game that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. In the example that we saw with MT a couple minutes ago, he skipped over a trigger for a side quest that you would otherwise lose like 4 to 6 seconds worth of just waiting through the cutscene. So skipping over that cutscene is very nice and very key. We're seeing here MT equip the resilience chip that we just bought, and he got 2 crit plus 1s. That gives him, I forget the numbers exactly, I think that's a 4% chance to crit total. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think I thought the regular crit ups were 4 and crit up plus 1 was 8, but I might be wrong. That does sound pretty high.
Either way, having access to those crit chips is a pretty big damage up if Reliictz isn't able to get any crits himself.
Here they come.
Being able to, although the critical hits are RNG as to when they happen, they hit for a massive amount of damage when you're pumping out full damage exploited damage with buffs, with taunt. You can see where I'm going with that. That's a lot of damage that you can deal out on a critical hit.
What is with these guys?
Yeah, essentially 5 times 5 times 5, right? is that
I
how
think
it's
even more. I think Kanaris had done the math or something, but in all, with every single damage up ability that we have available to us in A ending, that is, or rather by, I think it was an E ending. Either way, the amount of damage that we pump out in a speed run like this, I'm not too certain if it was for A ending or if it was for E ending, it's like 200 and something % damage that you're dealing overall, or 210 times damage.
very large
quickly
number.
here, I do want to point out, MT just performed a really interesting long jump where you're manipulating the abilities that you have available to you through pod spinning, pod launching, heavy attacking, and dashing to basically cross the chasm between the castle and the mainland. And again, MT is out of bounds again here, climbing the castle. This is by far my favorite skip. I really enjoyed myself when I was practicing that skip, because I really enjoyed myself, or enjoyed the intricacies of the castle in itself, where going through room to room, you can really get lost in the castle, and this skip essentially skips that entire thing.
And now we're coming up, we'll see on MT's screen, it's a female android, actually called A2, which we find out in this dialogue is a betrayer from the Yahoo unit. I know Mytharium's got some very, very interesting strategies here for how to fight this boss. It can be extremely difficult for people newer to the game, just based on the sheer volume of attacks that A2 can actually throw out. So it looks like MT had a really good fight there.
Yeah. Reliictz, unfortunately, was not high enough on his jump over the side quest cutscene coming out of the Pascal's village, but Reliictz was able to equip Resilience and 2 crit +1s, so effectively both Reliictz and MT have the same damage capability, but it all comes down to player skill in combat. A lot of the time save that many runners have is actually in combat. Having clean, effective, and efficient combat trumps basically any skip that you could find in this game. Having sloppy combat is definitely something that is rampant among many runners, myself included. I suck at combat.
Yeah, combat's really, really cool in this game. In my opinion, it's just got such a high skill ceiling that it means that you can really, really dig deep into it, and the game will give you a lot back if you're willing to put into it, which is very cool.
So MT is really taking the lead here. Reliictz is just about to enter the forest area, and MT is starting another section right after having defeated A2 already. MT is going to make his way to Resistance Camp and start the probably most resident sleeper part of the run.
9S, why did you ask Pascal about
Yeah, I think that's safe to say.
It's not recommended to interface with machines without consulting commands.
Soon TM.
Thanks, 2B.
Still, machines are the enemy. Don't forget it. Oh, it's dead. And anyway.
So you'll notice MT is aiming towards this box right next to an enemy, and he's going to fall through that box and basically dash through the fence there. That enables him to get behind the resistance camp and get access directly to the flooded city area, directly behind the resistance camp. He's going to go under that building there, trigger the discovery cutscene, which is a mandatory trigger. He's going to basically void out to the bottom of the map right there, and the game replaces him back up on solid ground. That solid ground is back at the resistance camp, so he's able to perform another plunge to this shore area to kill the enemies that are again required to progress the story, which is a very interesting technique because it showcases how intricate and how close together some of these areas are in the game world. And I thought personally that was really interesting when I first played this and first saw how these skips were possible.
Yeah, you definitely see how all of the areas are kind of interconnected or on top of each other. It's very interesting how they did so much in such a small area, really.
Nice. Reliictz doing the same technique that MT did earlier. That technique is known as Rainbow Road, that Reliictz just did to cross the chasm between the forest castle and the mainland. So MT is now entering Groon, resident sleeper or sleeping accommodation, if you will.
Yeah, so Grun is essentially a 15-minute long shoot 'em up, or thereabouts. And unfortunately, well, I don't know about you, but for me personally, Myth, any time I get to this point in a run, I start to feel very deflated. Any hype has gone.
I felt that for a little while, but I think in some of the more recent months, I've definitely taken to, I wouldn't really say enjoy, but really sort of just go through the motions of Grun. It's not an enjoyable sequence when speedrunning, maybe for the first couple attempts, but as a player who is more recently intrigued in very hard, any section of this game is pretty monk-ass. I just want to bring your attention to Reliictz, who's just entering the A2 fight. A2's getting a little bit away from him, but that's okay.
Yeah, we can kind of see A2 just constantly throwing out attacks there. She just basically never stops.
Oh, she is a very mean boss, casually and in this speedrun, on any difficulty, no matter what. She is relentless in the speedrun. One thing we actually didn't mention was how to escape the A2 sequence. So under normal circumstances, A2 hops out of the window and the game tells you to also hop out the window to chase her. But at the base of the forest courtyard, there lies a really long dialogue sequence that otherwise takes like 4 to 5 minutes or something. So we're not interested in that. We're just going to go through the back end of the arena the same way that we came in and hop over this invisible trigger and go right back to the transporter that we had unlocked and go directly to Pascal's village. There's not much to say on MT's screen. It's just deal with the enemies all through Grun. He just defeated a boss there, dealing a pretty ridiculous amount of damage. Most players don't actually realize that you have access to 2 pod programs while in a flight unit. And the amount of damage with a well-placed pod program like that can really do a good number on any of these enemies that you'll see here. Mostly on the bosses. For anybody who has played Nier Automata before, you'll know that you'll either enjoy Grun or you'll hate Grun with all your might.
So it's probably worth mentioning that at the moment I believe there is a bounty on Grun. I know it's certainly been discussed in the chat a fair few times.
Quote-unquote bounty.
I still stand by the pizza offer. If anyone finds Grun script, I will make you a pizza. I will stream myself making a pizza by hand, and I will ship it to you as payment.
Can you speedrun making that pizza?
I could try. You might get sick.
Making and eating.
That sounds like a good idea. We should do that.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Make and eat a pizza and then speedrun Automata. See who finishes first.
Nice. Reliictz was also able to do the void out strategy for Flooded City skip there.
And
so he's able to get the discovery cutscene at the Flooded City, void right back up to Resistance Camp, and plunge down to the shore here to fight these enemies. You were saying?
I was just going to say, just at the end of Reliictz doing that double plunge there, he actually did an extra little hop, and as far as I can tell, on a you know, a standard PS4 hard drive, that's actually required. The triggers don't fully load. If you don't do that, it'll just put you back up at the top, even when you are past the, you know, the point where it should spawn you on that shore.
I know I had some difficulty with that when I first practiced that on hard disk for my PC. Definitely some of these small little loading issues between versions of the game definitely sort of adds up. And even the different platforms as well.
Yeah, they're all...
It's not exactly the greatest invention mankind has ever made.
No, in fact, most runners have to use a mod called FAR, which has been developed by the community, which is really good because I know for certainly a lot of runners, I don't think they'd be able to run this game without that.
I certainly wouldn't. For whatever reason, the PC port is just a really poor port. Like, unbelievably bad. Notoriously bad, even.
Having trouble over there? Are you your...
Well, I would say don't let that put you off. If you haven't played this game before and you want to play it, check it out. I'd say don't let that put you off because, as I've said, most people with the FAR mod can get this game running to a fairly acceptable level.
Yeah, like what Marble Sodas is saying in the chat, FAR is amazing. I believe their name is spelled Chaldean, but definitely props to them and the team who worked on FAR, the community mod. It's definitely a huge help for getting people to actually play the game. Which many players, when first booting up the game, it's a bit of a shame that some would just look at it, see that it doesn't run, and shut it away. This game is amazing in terms of its storytelling. No other game has really got me as invested in the story and the lore and everything behind it. And even the characters as well in this game. It's like, it's nothing that I have personally ever experienced before.
Yeah, I
and it's
100%.
Definitely an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I'd say it's a very touching story, which, I don't know, Yoko Taro's always said it's a weird game for weird people, but I think it's got way wider appeal than that. But yeah, it's tremendous. It really plays with what you can do when creating a video game. Something, you know, that you can only do inside this medium, and that's not something we see very often. A lot of games kind of go for the cinematic approach, you know, and at certain points you feel like, well, maybe I'd be better off if this was a film, but at no point did I ever feel anything like that in Automata.
Exactly. Just because a game or a movie looks good doesn't mean that it's actually good.
Yeah, 100%. And it's not to say Nier Automata isn't without its faults, it's just that the things it excels at, it excels at them so well that it's very easy to look over its shortcomings.
Believe me, us as speedrunners definitely know a lot about this game, and the really silly things that happen to it, like some of these things that happen in this game, whether they be bugs or glitches or whatever, really have our heads sort of scratching, or have us scratching our heads, like, why would they ever design it like this? But at the bottom of our hearts, it's honestly something that we really appreciate in how they've developed this game and how they've presented it in this game, because definitely from a casual and a speedrunning perspective, the game is still fun. One thing to point out here, actually, in terms of the gameplay, MT is coming up, or is at a quote-unquote mini-boss called Core 2. You'll notice that he's been fighting these sort of nodes on Groon's body that enable him to defeat Groon, and those can sometimes give you really bad RNG. You have to defeat 4 little cores in order to kill the larger core on each of those nodes. And sometimes they rotate the wrong way, or the player isn't or the runner isn't able to kill the nodes fast enough. And at least personally, and I know a good number of runners have had really bad RNG on those sections. I'm sorry, because Groon is horrid, but it's a necessary evil for this section.
Yeah, it's unfortunate there's not really too much interesting to point out in this this area. It's pretty much, it plays exactly like it looks. You just kind of learn where the enemies come in and deal with them.
Yeah, one thing that I was really sort of interested in and really kind of, I don't know, perplexed by was that this section is all scripted. None of these enemy spawns change, none of them are any different from playthrough to playthrough. And I was really sort of expecting them to be random. Random enemy waves would have been a perfect fit for this, because for anybody who does actually manage to replay this game, you'll at least have a different experience between iterations. But one thing that really makes this section a lot more boring is how it's scripted, essentially. None of it really changes between each encounter or each time you play through it.
There are some fantastic lines of dialogue though during this boss fight. Some of my favourite lines of dialogue in the entire game.
Stupid mouth.
There's one where after you kill the first mini-boss, the Goliath Flyer, 9S says, oh, we're still picking up a large signal on the map, and 2B's response to it is just, didn't I kill that already? You know, just fantastic dialogue.
Alright everybody, it's time to wake up. MT's on the ground. Well, maybe not on the ground, now he's underwater, but... So one thing that MT just did there, going out into the ocean, was to skip a dialogue trigger here. It's not exactly important, but more importantly, he was trying to get to a different drown zone, where it basically, the game thinks that he came from a different location, and it replaces him in a different location than he originally was. Therefore, he's moving farther into the area with less effort, saving time.
And MT is now coming up to one of the most difficult skips in the game, in my opinion. This is certainly one that I see give everyone trouble from time to time, even the most experienced runners. So this clip that we're about to see MT attempt is extremely precise.
Oh, he's going for the keyboard and mouse strategy here.
So there's a few different lineups that you can do. However, they're all essentially you hold the heavy button and you use this giant stab attack, and you use the pushing power of that attack to essentially clip through this weird bit of rock. And
it looks like he's giving a little bit of a hard time here. There we go. So the idea for that clip is to basically find the correct angle for a heavy hold ability. Because the heavy hold has a lot of pushing power behind it, 2B actually clips through the wall, and you're able to go directly to the objective, which is this elevator, down into another section of the game. And hopefully we can sour please for the music in this section, because it is amazing.
Yep, I was just about to mention the music in Cockpit City is absolutely phenomenal.
It is unlikely the Yorha units came this far on their own. Hypothesis: the enemy must have placed.
And now we're going to see MT coming up to our final fight with Adam down in the Cockpit City. But first, we're going to basically, he wants us to sit through a huge dialogue where he's just going to dump a load of lore on us. So we can choose to just wait, or we can choose to do this skip here that MT is doing. It uses a lift and a plunge, and it pushes you out of bounds. What you can do then is go back to the elevator that we originally came down from, and there's a specific line of dialogue that Adam will say. If we very quickly enter and leave the elevator during this line of dialogue, it will actually skip the rest of the dialogue that Adam says, which I think saves around, what, a minute and a half, something like that?
Yeah, something around 50 seconds. But the general idea is that the dialogue that Adam is talking in, it's divided up into 3 different chunks, if you can call it that, or like dialogue sequences, where if you skip too early in this dialogue skip, you're actually skipping the wrong block of dialogue, where the longest of those 3 dialogue blocks is actually the last one, which we're able to skip using that dialogue in the elevator. One thing to actually point out there for MT, he was using for both Copied City clip, the one in the tunnel, and Mansplaining clip that we just saw in the Copied City next to Adam, he was using keyboard and mouse. Keyboard and mouse is very unique to the PC experience because you're able to actually switch between a controller and your keyboard. Now, obviously, when you're holding W on WSAND, you're strictly moving forward. So you're able to precisely predict where 2B will be facing and clip out using that knowledge that you are strictly moving forwards into a clip. And for very precise clips like Copied City and like Mansplaining, MT opted to use keyboard and mouse there. So things are moving relatively quickly here for MT, but he managed to skip through the dialogue of when talking to an enemy, but quickly talked to a computer girl that's just standing right next to an enemy. Now, if you leave a circle outside of an enemy's presence, you start to get a phone call in a conversation with Commander. But we don't want that dialogue. We want to skip that dialogue. So quickly, we're able to open up a dialogue box with this computer girl, walk into the dialogue trigger, and cancel Commander's dialogue there. And very quickly there, you also notice that MT had talked with Devila and Popola there. He bought some very key buffs that he can use for the final fight of the game, or of the run, rather. Those are more important in longer runs, but are still relatively important in a ending.
Oh yeah, they can certainly speed up one section of combat, especially.
Sounds good.
Very, very useful on higher difficulties. Normal mode, not so much.
So now we're seeing MT arrive at the factory again, which is where Prologue actually happened.
Return to sender, I guess.
Yeah. And we're seeing MT do a very cool strat here, which is called the upskirt strat for obvious reasons. Basically, what he's doing is we're locked into a really slow walk while Pascal gives us this dialogue. What we can do is actually aim the camera up to the skirt, and she will try and swap the camera out of the way. If we don't move the camera at all when she does this, and we have our camera settings set up correctly, she will just continue to do that motion, and it's just a tiny bit faster than the slow walk.
Reliictz making his way out of Groon here. So MT has a commanding lead here, about to go into a section called Deep Factory.
Yep, and this next section still gives me nightmares.
This all seems pretty shady, if you ask me.
So why are you
MT deciding he's gonna give Pascal a little bit of a beating there in the lift while no one's looking.
Pascal is a very mean boy.
Pascal is somehow even worse than 9S.
A very uncooperative machine, and hopefully he's not very mean to MT. He's not generally mean, but in in some instances, Pascal has just been the silliest machine you will ever see, and just not want to cooperate with the player.
Hello, my name is Pascal.
Reliictz making his way to copied city clip here.
It looks like we're going to have 2 clips coming up.
Damn it, I was right. This is shady.
So while Reliictz is there trying copied city,
Oh, it looks like he's
MT's
going
actually...
for... Oof. That's going to be a relatively large time loss for Reliictz. Having to go all the way around is a little bit of a time loss here, because clipping through and going directly to the elevator is just slightly faster than going all the way around, but still losing time nonetheless, unfortunately. MT opted to kill most of the Mook machines in awesomely named Mook's room. There is actually a clip out of that room that makes fighting those machines very consistent, but if you have very good combat, you can actually kill those enemies fast enough to trigger the dialogue in a relatively fast manner. Reliictz making his way into copied city. I don't know, Tech, do you want to handle Deep Factory Skip?
I think you would probably be more qualified to handle this.
So what MT is trying to do here, after talking to 9S in the machines in that little biped's body, is clip out of this room and basically void out. Now he's having a little bit of difficulty here with the angle, but there's like, I think there's 7 to 10 different ways of actually clipping out of this room, but each player really kind of uses different techniques. So finally he was able to clip out there. Voiding out to the bottom of the map essentially resets this elevator that he's now going into. In normal circumstances, this elevator, once closed, can no longer be opened. But with voiding out, it actually resets the elevator's state. So you can open it and re-enter it and go up to the Mook's room here. Now what he's going to be doing in this top room is clip out at one of these pipes and fall all the way down to the Deep Factory area and hit a specific trigger along the path that is required. And because this room is so high up, the game actually thinks that, oh, I should replace the player to where he originally is. That was a little bit scary by MT there, but it looks like he saved it.
So there's actually a soft lock there, which is very easy to get. MT was very close to hitting it there.
Oh no! Oh, okay. Salvageable.
Yeah, this...
Salvageable? Okay, that worked. So, for a second there, it really looked like MT was about to hit a soft lock area, but with some quick thinking, he was able to go back to the original pathing and find his way back to the proper pathing, and still be able to hit all the triggers and complete the rest of the skip. He lost a little bit of time there, but he's still relatively safe here. That was a very dicey skip.
Yeah, it was extremely scary because that could have essentially been the race for MT. I mean, I've not seen him do any safety saves, so...
I don't think he has either, but under other circumstances where you're able to get enough distance to get to that final platform MT was aiming for there on some of his jumps, you would just be able to go back into the 2D section of that area and still be able to finish the rest of the section. Unfortunately, because he didn't get enough distance, he wasn't able to fully make that that work, unfortunately. Reliictz finished with Adam 2 here.
Yep, he had a very good mansplaining. And it looked like he got the commander dialogue skip as well. So Reliictz will be making his way to the factory, while MT is currently just sort of hanging around.
Although I do believe it is worth pointing out, I'm not too certain on if MT's timer on screen is loadless or real time. That might be just some confusion between us on the back end here.
I think it is loadless from what I've seen. I'm pretty sure I've seen it pause during loads.
Okay. Reliictz isn't too far behind, but once MT finishes the section in a little bit, there will be a little bit of a period where the time might be a little confused here. But either way, MT making some very good fight in Soshi, carving his way through the boss fight.
Yeah, and essentially MT's now into the very back end of this run, which is pretty much all just combat. There's not really much in the way of skips or anything that are going to happen from here on. It's just going to be some very nice combat. I suppose there's still a few skips that could happen yet. We'll have to wait and see, but...
Reliictz opting to take a safety save here before entering the factory area.
That's a
very
good call.
bold move.
Yeah, I like that decision.
The problems with the deep factory skip that we were talking about earlier is that there is a very real possibility of you soft locking, and unfortunately having that happen is a very massive time loss, and MT just managed to skirt it when he was just about to enter the Soshi fight. So as one player leaves the factory, the other enters.
I had no idea such a vast space existed beneath the abandoned factory. I need to return and investigate as soon as possible.
So there's a nice little optimization here. We'll see if MT goes for it. No, there's a very nice little optimization there where you can actually time some jumps and plunge all the way down those stairs there. If you aim it actually right, you can miss the entire platform at the bottom and just shoot straight off the right there. Very minor optimization, but I've always thought it looks very cool.
Plunges in general are just super cool. It's a very interesting technique, and casually you would never even know that some of these moves exist. I know casually I had no idea that plunging or any of this high jump or long jump techniques existed in this game. And for anybody who has seen some of these compilations and montages of players performing really interesting sort of juggling with enemies at higher levels and with specific abilities and techniques, it's a very interesting sort of moveset that we have available to us. And we've been witnessing this basically throughout all of the run. So a little bit of chaos here on MT's screen. The resistance camp is now on fire. And we gotta clear out all these machines.
So let's see if Reliictz goes for the Moot Room skip. It looks like he's going for it. And he gets it first time.
Nice.
So what that's going to do is that's just going to reset all the enemies on the floor and open those elevator doors, which will skip the fight that MT had to do in that room.
Clipping out in this room is nice because it's at least consistent in a fight that is generally inconsistent, with enemy placements being all over the place. Oof, but it looks like he's having a little bit of difficulty here trying to get Pascal into the elevator. Oh no!
Yeah, they look like they've boxed that elevator off from Pascal.
Oh jeez.
Oh, there we go, he's in.
Yeah, sometimes those enemies there can overwhelm the player. Turning to MT's screen here, he's now facing a boss known as Bokushi. Very similar to Soshi, but this time with guns? Question mark? Anyway, MT is really sort of chopping through these boss fights here with the technique of double damage exploit. He's able to deal a massive amount of damage to these bosses, and this is really where the technique shines, and being able to kill bosses quickly is a huge advantage.
Well, Pascal's been pretty obnoxious on Reliict's screen. There he is. I think he just got stuck up on the out of bounds when Reliictz went to clip out there. But yeah, MT's having some phenomenal combat at the back end of this run as he goes into Core 1 here. So Core 1, we choose to get up on this hill. Wow, that was very fast. Basically, we get Core 1 up on that hill so we can hit it with damage glitches. If you try and fight it on the floor, it can raise up.
Nice! Reliictz getting the trigger for Deep Factory.
Oh, very.
Fortunately, he's going to have to clip out again, but that's fine. He has all the triggers that he needs. Oof, and it looks like he's having a little bit of a hard time there.
Yeah, I mean, that is very janky out of bounds area. It does really want to push you back in. And also Pascal can give you a little nudge as well, which doesn't help.
Now, I believe on MT's screen, he's level 19 going into Core 2 here, up at the Pascal's fence. This is putting him in a relatively good position, because the higher the level that you are, the more damage you're able to output in a single blow. It's about like a 5% increase in terms of damage, but it's still significant that the higher level that you are, the better damage you do against these higher level enemies.
Let's take these guys out first.
But still, a very nice Deep Factory execution by Reliictz.
Yeah, that was a very, very nice double plunge at the end there. And we can see Reliictz fighting Core 2 at the moment. Let's see if he can manage to get a quick kill here. Okay, that's still fairly nice, and he's got the very, very nice level 20 for this final boss fight coming up.
I think the unit presiding over them may have gone mad.
It's Eve.
So level 20 is not required, it can really help out. It's quite a large boost to damage, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, it's about a 5% increase in terms of damage. It's nice for an instance in this fight that MT is now entering right now. Eve works in a good number of phases. I think there's 4 phases in total. This first phase is mostly just getting him to a certain threshold, but there's one attack that he can do that causes him to go high up into the air. Many players have experienced this. It doesn't look like MT is going to get it here, which is good. If he did the move known as platforms, then that would be a pretty big time loss here.
Yeah,
Eve is now transitioning into phase 2. So he's healing back up to full, and it's basically waiting for dialogue to finish here. There would be a better technique to actually slow the game down enough that Eve doesn't even have to go back up to full health and then go all the way back down. You can just keep him at relatively low health and skip the second phase. Again, quickly we're transitioning into Eve phase 3 here.
And it looks like Reliictz is just coming out of factory as well now. Just finished up his fight with Soshi. But yeah, MT here taking on this third phase of Eve. So as you can see, he's started flying all over the arena, which can make him very annoying to hit. Obviously, we can't do the damage glitch we've been essentially relying on throughout the game at this point. So we just have to take him down with ranged attacks. This is where the skill salve that MT bought from Poplar and Deviler will come in handy.
Yeah, there's a good number of techniques in this phase that you can use in between pod firing, pod lasers, getting under Eve and melee attacking him. there's a good number of techniques that players can use to get through that phase, but in this final phase here, you are restricted to only pod firing. This is mostly important on paying attention on when your buffs are active, but in higher difficulties, it's a lot more reliant on your positioning as well.
Yeah,
but unfortunately, in normal mode, you could just face tank anything.
Yeah, I mean, once you start getting up to any of the difficulties above normal, if anyone's not aware, it actually removes lock-on, which makes it even more difficult. It's just another thing to have to manage on top of everything else. And MT's just finishing the game here.
Reliictz was having a little bit of a hard time there in some of the out of bounds. That wall that he was stuck in is very sticky.
Upload this corrupted data to the bunker. So
9S.
Okay, Reliictz finishing with a very respectable 132.51.
I believe that is a loadless time from what it looks like. We'll have to see what it comes out to in terms of real time, but that was a very nice run from MT. Reliictz just making his way out to Resistance Camp here after having left Factory. Again, in this final section, combat is very important between dealing with all these enemies and dealing with all these bosses that you have to kill to get to the final boss is very, very important. Being able to deal with them quickly is a very... It's a tough skill to pick up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just this back end 10 minutes or so of the game is just it's essentially a boss rush mode. So if you don't have particularly clean combat, it'll really show over the 3 or 4 bosses, 3, 4, 5 bosses that you fight at the back end of this game.
So one thing that we kind of skimmed over in the Burning Resistance Camp fight is that first wave of enemies that 2B first faces there in the main sort of area of the Resistance Camp, those enemies aren't actually required to complete the section. You can just leave them behind and deal with this 2D side-scroller wave of enemies.
Fun little fact, this side-scroller section's actually one of my least favourite sections of the game because of the medium bipeds. They actually have 2 or 3 death animations, I want to say. One of them is incredibly slow and it completely blocks the path.
Reliictz having a little bit of a difficult time here with these stubbies. One of the main complaints that we have against these stubbies is one of their attacks is very sort of silly looking, where they just whirl their arms in a sort of helicopter fashion. And unfortunately, when we as runners go to damage glitch, because we are doing a dash motion, and if you're too close to those stubbies, you'll actually perform a perfect dodge, like Reliictz was performing there. And sometimes you can just get animation locked in that perfect dodge because that attack animation is so relentless. So being able to deal with that is a little bit of an interesting experience. I know I've struggled in that fight for the longest amount of time.
Yeah, it seems to be a kind of attack pattern that comes up time and time again with Platinum games. They seem to really like these crazy big hitbox spinning attacks.
Yeah.
We see them in some of the shoot 'em up sections as well with the fidget spinners.
I never quite realized.
Reliictz is cleaning up on Bokashi here.
The commander's put me in charge of your maintenance, ma'am.
So it looks like he's going to get a little overwhelmed with these stubbies here. Bokuji is a very weird boss in that his final death animation is kind of RNG, because at the same time when he gets thresholded, he has the choice of either going into his death throes or choosing an attack. And most of the time, if the runner isn't fully paying attention, he will go into an attack animation, losing time versus him just going strictly into his death throes. So fortunately, Core 1 here for Reliictz is being very nice, going low to the ground there, especially on that hill, makes it very easy for Reliictz to defeat Core 1. So we got maybe about like 5 minutes or so.
Yep, not long left at all of this run.
Perhaps we're not so different after all. Pod 153, I order you to halt all logical thoughts.
He's taking the top path. Reliictz here opting to take the top path. So this is something that I've seen some runners do, which basically allows us to ideally have slightly faster movement, because it gives us a big plunge, and also we don't auto-lock onto some of the enemies, but it seems very dependent on where those enemies spawn once you're up there, so it's debatable as to whether it's faster or not. Some people definitely like to go for it, others don't. And Reliictz just there we go, finishing off those machines there outside Pascal's village, Pascalsdorf. And it looks like he's having some pretty decent Core 2 combat here. It shouldn't be a problem.
You saved us! Oh, thank you so much!
What happened here?
The machines on the network all went berserk at the same moment. I think the unit presiding over them may have gone mad.
It's Eve. It's gotta be.
If we destroy this presiding unit, will it stop the rest?
Most likely, yes.
Very close to getting hit on some of those stubbies. It's interesting because some of those attack animations that those stubbies do are very different from earlier in the game, in that they have this sort of electricity attack that isn't really shown anywhere else in the game. Just something small to point out.
Yeah, the hitbox on that attack's pretty large as well, because it seems to envelop all around them. So it's very easy to do some perfect evades as you're trying to dash past them. But
so
yeah,
Reliictz entering Angry Boy, facing off against Eve here. Oh, it sounded like he was about to get platforms there, but fortunately he got enough damage out, which is nice.
Some beautifully timed critical hits there.
The energy seems to be coming from a large number of linked machine life forms.
Oh, it looked like he was about to go for a strategy that I had alluded to earlier, where you slow the game down enough that Eve, with a specific amount of damage and slow-mo active, you're able to stop him from healing to 100%, and at a certain point in the dialogue between Tubi and her pod, you're able to skip this second phase of Eve.
Enemy unit cut off from network functionality.
Making our way into phase 3. So one thing to point out here is for Eve to remain taking the maximum amount of damage as possible is to make sure that he's taunted. But the problem is that sometimes the game doesn't always make it clear that he is taunted. And Reliictz just has to keep an eye on his buffs, but fortunately he has the defensive buffs active with him. Sometimes in this section you can actually die in normal mode by not paying attention to buffs, but sometimes that's not always the case. There are some cases that you can survive.
Yeah, there's a few attacks he can throw out where it'll just be 2 waves of bullets, and essentially if he's taunted and you don't have the defense buffs, and he hits you, the chances are you're gonna die there, unless you're spamming heals throughout. I know most certainly I'll be buying some defensive buffs. It essentially turns it from a 2-hit kill to a 3-hit kill.
NFCS destroyed. Close range combat.
But yeah, Reliictz here going into the last phase of Eve.
Of course, dealing with this phase is a lot easier on difficulties that have access to the lock-on ability, in that you're able to just auto-target to Eve while he flies all the way around. But in some cases where he is flying somewhere but it's too far away from you, actually locking onto Eve and staying locked onto him really makes the pod fire sort of shotgun sort of spread, which isn't exactly what we want. So staying relatively close to Eve is a much higher damage output than otherwise.
Oh, nice. And Reliictz is saying that he got a PB in chat, so that's good. Where to go, Reliictz?
Nice.
Yeah, it was a 146.02 from the looks of things for Reliictz there.
Nice. Very good runs from both of these guys.
Yeah, that was a fantastic race. Yeah, both runners put on a really good show here. That was very, very entertaining to watch. It was very fun to commentate on.
Yeah, it was lots of fun. Thank you to MT and Reliictz for racing. Thank you to Speed Gaming for hosting this. I want to thank TechTheist for also coming on here with me as well.
No, thank you, Myth.
Next up, I think, like, almost immediately, we'll be going into another race between myself and TechTheist, commentated by Six and MT in just a little bit.
Fantastic. Do we know if we're getting MT and Reliictz in to talk to him or anything, or?
I think so, yeah. If you guys want to hop
Very
in.
Cool. Yeah, just get their thoughts on the runs and everything. But yeah, also we should thank Canaris for, well, everyone actually involved that set up this tournament. We've done a fantastic job.
Yes,
I know Canaris certainly put in so much work, so that's really appreciated.
So for anybody who is out there and is interested in purchasing Nier Automata and playing through it, whether it be casually or learning the speedrun, well, it should definitely already be in your checkout for buying it. It should already be bought and you should already be playing it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But if you do actually want to check out the speedrun, we have a Discord active. I believe the link to it is discord.nearspeedrun.com. We have a wiki, we have guides, we have everything related under the sun to speedrunning this. And check out the links below, not below, but check out the links tourney.nearspeedrun.com for the bracket for this tournament, and speedgaming.org/NA for the links in chat for the rest of this tournament. It's going to be an interesting tournament. Lots of great matches to come and to witness. Lots of great runners as well. We're going to be here for a good number of weeks.
Oh, I think Reliictz is here in the chat with us.
Hey.
Hey, Reliictz.
Hey.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to the organization for this tournament. It was really funny to run against MT. He's so fast.
Yeah, congratulations on that PB, dude. Well, that's it's really good work.
Yeah, thanks.
But yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything that you want to point out about that race, anything that you thought went really well, or anything you weren't happy with.
I think both of you guys were really close on Deep Factory from soft locking. Like, MT had a pretty interesting experience trying to save his final plunge into the final little section of Deep Factory, but Reliictz, I think you had a little bit of a similar situation.
I actually was pretty okay with my Deep Factory. It wasn't too bad, besides that Pascal was thinking that he don't want to come to me. That was kind of sad. But other than that, I think it was good. Like, for me.
It's still pretty solid, overall.
Yeah, it was a very entertaining run to watch.
Yeah, I'm quite happy. I had like 4 goals or 5. So that's good for me. And thanks for commentating this race.
No problem, dude.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for racing.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. And good luck on your runs.
Thanks, dude.
Yeah. We'll be transitioning to my race and Techtheist's race pretty soon, relatively.
Yeah,
I don't know if we're going to be
sure,
taking a break in between.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I was just about to say I don't know whether I should start the trash talk now or.
Oof.
I think that's the way that I need to win. I just need to BM my way through every race. Just get inside everyone's head.
I'm already stressed out as is.
Yeah, I'm not sure if MT's popping in or what we're doing now. Ooh, I don't know. Blue Metal seems to think that there should be some trash talk.
Okay, so it looks like it'll be in a little bit. Because we just have to get set up. Either way, thank you again to Speed Gaming. Thank you again to the races and the racers.
And thank you to everyone who watched.
Yes, thank you.
Hope you enjoyed it.
Next race will probably be in a couple minutes. We just need some time to get set up. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks.